Hello, I'm Rod Mead-Sperry here with Mariana Restrepo. Together we are the editors of Buddhadharma, which is found at lionsroar.com. Recently, we spoke to folks at the Namchak Foundation about their Compassion in Action Fellows program, which is described as a year-long inner and outer change program that supports next-generation leaders in learning meditation practice, building community, and promoting social change. Today, as a fun follow-up, we're speaking to Saulkdi Yangh, who was in this year's cohort with the program, and that cohort just finished its 4-week summer immersion retreat. So he's fresh from that. It's the second year of this program. Thank you, Saulkdi, for joining us. And tell us, what was it that had drawn you to the program?
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful introduction. I would say that the program actually found me versus me finding the program. I found it on Instagram or on social media. I just graduated college, but I knew that I wanted to spend the summer finding a program that brought together, spirituality or mindfulness and social change. Just because that's how I like to practice my own community organizing at this stage in my life. So I was like Googling everything, trying to find different programs. And I couldn't find anything, but then I guess, the algorithm or the FBI agent, whoever you want to call it, like this Namchak Compassion and Action Fellowship just randomly popped up in my Instagram ads one day. And I looked at the website, it seemed legit, and I ended up applying for it. A bunch of my other friends who also part of the program, they did a lot more thorough research of the program itself. They actually looked up the people to see, oh, is this like a legit lineage? Is this, are there credentials? Is this reliable? One of my friends, she is from Japan, and one of her mom ended up asking their local monk about the Namchak lineage, and if the Namchak is legit, and the local monk said, oh yeah, it's a real thing. And since that was only with this monk's permission did my friend end up coming to the Namchak Compassion and Action Fellowship. But yeah, it was just blind faith. It met my criteria, and there was no reason not to do it. Looking back now, though, I think I would have definitely done a lot more in-depth research just to ensure that I knew what I was getting into. Because who wants to sign up to go to the middle of Montana with no with no phone or anything, for like 4 weeks, no contact. I'm like, this could have easily been kind of like a culty kind of situation, but thank goodness it wasn't.
Well, thank goodness. Was it a more difficult experience than you had sort of budgeted for in your mind? How did it meet or compare to your expectations?
I don't think difficult. I would not say so. I would say it was so very unexpected. I think when because I don't have a Buddhist background. I dabble in Buddhism here and there, but not super in depth. And so actually going there, it was very, very intentional. And so I think that's where there was, and that was very surprising to me at least. The intentionality and the intensity of the program, because we meditated 3 times a day. We didn't have our phones all week, with exceptions to like one day, which was either Saturday or Sunday. It was very, very community oriented. And so just like seeing the same people every day in retreat and just talking to the same people every day and not having technology as a buffer, it was an interesting experience. It was a really, really good experience though. I think for others though, it was definitely very shocking. And I think for me, the shock came after I left the retreat. Because it was just like, oh wait, I had this amazing experience and now I'm going back into, the regular world, quote unquote, or whatever, leaving the incubator. And it was just it was kind of almost like a shock to, the body, the mind, and the spirit. Especially since, during retreat we only saw dirt and like grass and animals, right? We didn't see a lot of bright colors. And so like coming back into the real world, that shocking was just that stimulation and like stimulated with, different, the pacing of life, stimulated with, with different like people from different walks of life, all these colors, the amount of like consumerism. I became more hyper aware of just the consumerism and being reintegrated back. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. I realized I was like, I definitely went like different directions with that.
I have a follow-up question. You mentioned that you were not Buddhist per se before going into the program. Can you tell us about like what your kind of spiritual practice was before going to the program and how that was different while you were in the program and after the program?
Yes. So I'm Hmong, and I hold that very dearly to my heart. We are heritage practitioners of shamanism and animism. And so rooted in the belief that, you know, everything has sentience, everything has a spirit. And, you know, as people, we are put on this earth to coexist with these different, you know, sentient beings, whether it's the trees, the earth, the mountains, other animals, other people, all those things. And a lot of our practice is rooted in our shamans, which are just mediators between, you know, the spirits and the humans. And so a lot of our healing, a lot of our practice comes from this world understanding and from our shaman mediators. And that being said, there's been a lot of, you know, shaman Buddhist like influence throughout just Hmong history, and, you know, a lot of social religious exchange. But going into that space, I think I meditated before, and you know, I carried that framework and that Hmong indigenous framework with me. And I think afterwards, I mean, I remember during the retreat, I had a whole crisis, like, oh my gosh, wait, I can't say that these meditations aren't working, you know, because like we were doing a shamatha, we were doing the four immeasurables, and they were having some like really real life positive effects. And the thing about shamanism too is like I've been to like rituals and ceremonies. I've seen the effects of like ceremonies and how it impacts people. So I'm like, there are these two truths coexisting now, and I didn't know what to do with it. A lot of clashing, not just necessarily clashing, but these two different worldviews that I've never integrated before. And so the second half of the retreat was a lot of me working through that and trying to work through, you know, how can I hold space for both? And I think at the end of it, I came, what brought me peace and what brings me peace is, you know, I think with shamanism and Hmong animism, it really helps ease suffering, right? And that's what a lot of Buddhism is about easing suffering, but it really helps ease the suffering of folks and helps, you know, it's very rooted in restorative justice and care at its best. And with Buddhism, the end goal, in my understanding, I might be wrong here, is the liberation of all sentient beings, right? So maybe also through these meditations and the four immeasurables, I can work towards that goal of liberating all sentient beings. And at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that easing the suffering of people now is not any more important. Something that I really appreciate from my teacher, the teacher Justin, was just, you know, there's that ultimate truth and that relative truth, right? And although, you know, we live in this, although the end goal is to see ultimate reality and ultimate truth, that doesn't mean that the suffering that people are going through is any less meaningful or any less valid or legitimate, right? That relative truth, for some people, that's still legit truth to them too, right? And so coming from that place of compassion, we can still ease that suffering. So I think that's where I see shamanism and animism and my faith putting in place in that, addressing a lot of these relative and sometimes these ultimate truths. And there's so much beauty and worth in that. And at the same time, I can also hold space to both practice, but also encourage meditation, tapping into foreign measurables, you know, all those things. So yeah, so leaving now, I hold space for both my shaman roots and also my Buddhist practice and my Buddhist belief/frameworks.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. You had mentioned earlier that you have some involvement, community engagement, community organization, I think is the phrase you used. I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about what that is and why you thought this program would be a good fit, or why your activism and organization might benefit from what you learned in this program.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely claim myself as like a community builder and nurturer. And a lot of that comes from, I think, just coming from community-oriented community, Hmong community. But what really pivoted what I value and what I see and what I want to contribute to my community organizing has a lot to do with the George Floyd uprising, which took place in Minnesota in the Twin Cities, the murder of George Floyd. And I think during that time period, just really, really seeing how much people were organizing from the framework and from the standpoint of trauma, from hurt and pain, and how that comes from a place of reactiveness, right? Sometimes when we build community, when we come together, it comes from this place of reactiveness, of feeling so much pain or grief that we don't know what to do with it, or so much anger and not knowing what to do with it. And so we project it into our community organizing, community building, and that goes into sometimes the relationships that we build, right? And so I think for me, that was something that I saw a lot in the different, like, whether it's like nonprofits, grassroots initiatives, or even like friendships that I had, where the intention and the heart is in the right place, which is to help people and uplift people. But then sometimes we will say these terms of these things that doesn't necessarily make sense or align with the actions that were being taken. And a big example of that is just like cancel culture. I'm not a fan of cancel culture. But sometimes if you don't know the right language, you don't know the right lingo, all these things, you weren't seen as like a good activist or a good community organizer. And to me, that's some BS. Like some people just don't know, right? Some people just don't have access to information. Some people don't just again may not have to like thought about those things. And so where's the grace and the kindness there? And so I just saw a lot of hurt in those spaces. And so going to the Namchak compassion in action, specifically bringing back full circle, it goes back to what I really wanted to find this summer, was trying to find a program that advocated for mindfulness, advocated for restorative justice, advocated for dealing with our traumas, dealing with our our suffering, all these things. Because if we're not aware of our traumas and our suffering, I believe when we're not aware of it, it oftentimes bleeds into all other aspects of our lives, including how we build community and how we organize. And something that a lot of the stuff that I learned from the Compassion in Action Fellowship, unconsciously address some of those things that I wasn't even aware about. Example is this, again, like with shamatha and with meditating, a big part of it, and I might be wrong here, is just like catching ourselves when we're being reactive, right? Catching ourselves, creating pause and breath when we and like really sensing, where is this response coming from, and how can I identify that and grow awareness in that, right? And that's a very Buddhist like belief and philosophy. Like I think that can be so true, and how we build relationships or organize or build community or engage in social justice. So yeah, that's hopefully that again answers your question, and I was able to kind of bring it all together.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it was really great. I'm wondering, you have mentioned that you work with youth and you just finished kind of a camp, I think you told us. Can you tell us about like specific ways that you have implemented what you learned with the compassion program in the work that you do with youth?
Yes. So I love youth work, but it can be very, very draining. It can be very, very draining, and just working those big operations. And so I think a really big one in itself is just finding energy to continue doing that work. And what I mean by that is one of the lamas that came and taught for us, amazing individual, Lama Chuni. She identified the difference between compassion and empathy. Whereas with empathy, you're able to sit with someone, and oftentimes in empathy, we experience burnout, right? I think it's called empathy fatigue, or sometimes we call it compassion fatigue. But what Lama Chuni really, really articulated well was just that, yes, empathy, we can sit with someone, but compassion is taking the extra step and wanting to alleviate their suffering. And compassion is endless within Buddhism, right? We all have access to that immense and that infinite compassion and love within all of us and each other. And so when we come from this place of compassion, it doesn't necessarily burn out. And so when it comes to this youth work in this camp, I found many times where I was like very drained in the middle of it, because you pour your heart and your soul into something, and I'll find myself just like meditating. In the middle of a camp during my break, instead of eating lunch, just like meditating and accessing, that compassion and that compassion or that love, and that would really, really ground me into this space. And so I think that is just one aspect of how I was able to incorporate it. Another one that this is I guess kind of Buddhism, but kind of not Buddhism. But again, this Lama, she also said, miracles happen in space. And so when we create space, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through, coming together community, whether it's internal or external space, we are able to create miracles. And so with that teaching, I think about my youth work and how just the importance of creating space for these young people to explore their identities, to explore, building, being in community and building relationships. Because, I think loneliness is such an epidemic nowadays, and our young people are experiencing that really, really hard, right? With the, especially for the height of the pandemic, where a lot of them no longer know how to socialize, or they may have a hard time socializing with folks outside their family. And so with this camp, a lot of it allows just, what does it mean to create space internally and externally to hold and to allow these connections to happen in very intentional and very, very, very mindful ways. Another one is just, I think, being very, very intentional about how I engage with youth and how youth engages with each other. Kids can be mean sometimes. They can be, and I choose to see the best in, everyone. I try to, but kids can be mean sometimes, right? Or sometimes, as young people, when they're overstimulated, when they're experiencing all these things, as parents, as adults, we can be very dismissive of that, or even, oh, this is not a serious issue, but like it is serious to them, right? They're experiencing a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings. And so I think going back to this notion of space, in creating space, how can I create space for these young folk to feel held and cared for, and to feel, that sense of support, where someone that may not have that experience at home. And then how can we teach that with them for each other, whether it's with mindful practices, like just, I remember like sometimes when the kids would cry, I would just, we'd just do breathing exercises, to de-escalate, or whether it's just like was sitting outside with one of them for like 30 minutes or an hour plus, all those things. And so how can I show them that care and that compassion? And then how can we, again, teach them to show that with each other? A memory that I have and I hold very dearly is just like this, there was this little girl crying, and this one of our students, and it was just like giving me a hug, right? And they're not related or anything. Like this student didn't even know it. This little girl was in first grade, and this other student was in middle school. But she saw that the first grader was crying, and she just wanted a hug. So the seventh grader hugged her, and she ended up helping carry her all the way to the office where we could call her mom. Again, this first grader was just missing her mom. And then when the first grader just, she was like heaving and crying a lot, and the middle schooler, she was, she was gonna cry with her. She was like, "Oh, this makes me cry," just like seeing her like cry and miss her mom and stuff like that. And so all three of us did a breathing activity together. I think that was just a very, very beautiful moment of, how breath and how mindfulness can create space for care and for miracles to happen and occur.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. That's wonderful. One last question, if I may. Who in your estimation should consider taking up this program and joining this program, having been involved in it, or who wouldn't? If who might not like this kind of thing, and who would, in your estimation?
I'm very biased. I think everyone should. I think everyone should. Yeah, I think there's space for everyone. I would say, particularly those though, if I was to, have a particular target audience for this, I think those really, really trying to find and discover community, and really trying to find what Sangha means, right? I've talked to some of my other friends who have dabbled in Buddhism, and they'll talk about, how they have a lot of experience with the Buddha and the Dharma within the three precious jewels, but don't have a lot of experience with Sangha. Right? I think Sangha, to me, my Sangha, my cohort, they mean so, so much, and they keep me so, so anchored and grounded. And so I think for whoever, whether you're practicing Buddhist or not, but if you just want to experience Buddhism, and like the community that Buddhism can create, I think this is the space for you. I'm hopefully I'm not oversharing, but one of my friends, I love her very, very dearly. But at the end of our fellowship retreat, she was saying, I'm paraphrasing here, but she was just saying how now that she knows that this community exists, and this kind of community care, this kind of Sangha can exist in relations to Dharma and the Buddha, how can I go back into, the world again, knowing that this is possible,
Mm.
And so again, I'll bring this back to space and miracles. When we create space for Sangha, when we create space for community and really implement that intentionality of care and Dharma and Buddha, miracles can happen. And I think we're all still feeling the after waves and after impacts of that. So anyone who just wants to experience community in very new and, for lack of a better term, enlightening ways, shall apply for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Saudi, for joining us and sharing your experiences of the Compassion in Action program. For anyone listening to this or watching this and wanting to learn more, visit Namchak, NAMCHAK.org, and select the programs tab on the website. For Buddhadharma and Lions Roar, we are Rod Mead Sperry and Mariana Restrepo. Thanks for sitting in with us.